I don't know if I can take the irony in your voice.
My voice might have irony in it,
Yeah.
but it is not satire. This is the true part of the channel. Everything else we just joke about, obviously. This, however, is true down to the very core of your being, if you will.
So what do you mean when you say spirituality?
What do you think I mean?
I don't know. That's why I asked the question.
Tell me your conceptualization of my concept.
I'd rather hear you explain it yourself, which you probably can't, which is why you're trying to get me to explain it for you. But
Well, I want to give you the freedom. I'd hate for it to be a dictation to you. That wouldn't be fair, and that'd be demeaning.
so your version of spirituality is something you can't grasp or get a handle on.
It is something
Quantify it
individual.
anyway.
It's something individual to the person that you can. So take Socrates, for example. So Socrates said that he can't teach anyone; he can only make them think. And that is really what spirituality and the purpose of this spirituality channel is about. We can make people think, introspect, understand their place within the world, but we don't really want to dictate to them. We don't want to give them a dogmatic, ideologically rigid view of the world. That's not what this is about. So that's why I ask you, what do you think spirituality is? Is it the budding flower on a fresh lawn? Is it the ability to navigate the complex situations with your loved ones, significant others, and your workplace colleagues? Or is it how you manage to achieve your dreams that you've had in your heart since a young child? It could be any of those things, and many more.
You have to cut this bit out because I can't focus when you're talking to me like that.
I don't know why, I was just talking normally here.
You're not talking normally. I don't know whether it's like the fact that you're sitting on a high perch with your legs spread like that. It's just in your rugby shorts, just giving me the Sermon on the Mount, so to speak. I don't know. I just think everything you said there is woo-woo. To be fair.
I'll have you know everything I said has at least a tangential grounding in B.F. Skinner's work. Tangential.
That's the problem in itself. I don't think Skinner would. He would just like turn away from any person that used that word.
Yeah, but he's dead. So what does he know?
Well, he'd be turning in his grave. I think that the only thing that I was like, all right, that's something we can talk about is.
We can talk about all of it, Barry. Don't shut down my free speech.
That I want to talk about is clarify, how you be in the world, because I think that's you can fluff it up with. We can fluff it up. Just give me a moment while I think of.
Yeah, I'll give you a moment.
You can Deepak Chopra. Chopra? Deepak Chopra?
Yeah,
Chopra?
chakra is something else. Chakra is
Deepak.
the life spirit energy
Deepak
within
has
all.
chakra, doesn't he? Deepak's chakras.
He unpacks chakras.
Yeah, he unpacks. Yeah, so
Deepak Chopra.
Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, big Chopra.
Yeah.
Plus 2 strength.
I thought you were delving into some Deepak Chopra level of monologuing there, but I think how you
Everything I said, I meant the words of.
It's good for you, but I think how you be in the world, I think that's worth.
Are you afraid? You can't be part of the spirituality series and be afraid of spirituality. I mean, you can, but then you're a test case, not a participant. Do you want a serious answer about spirituality? So I can give you a serious answer. I don't know if you'll like it or not, but I can give you a serious answer. The serious answer about spirituality is all those things that we can have contribute to our life that are metaphysical in the sense that they're not perfectly and explained and crystallized out by science. So that means, for example, all the things that are not part of the biology, physics, chemistry sciences, and all the things that are not perfectly understood by psychology, for example, but can affect our lives in a negative or preferably positive way, would fall under spirituality. So how you are in the world would count, obviously. But it can also be other things related to that, which is why I don't say it's one thing and that's it. I'd rather keep it open in a not category rather than a descriptive specific category. So it's everything that is not clearly defined by science rather than picking one thing and saying, that's it.
God, man, I'm losing it. The what do they call those? Prometheus. What are those guys?
Engineers.
The engineers. Yeah.
They don't look Jewish at all.
No, not them. But that's what we're talking about. The Jewish engineers that engineered.
Yeah. I think that there's an element of metaphysics that's missing from people's lives today. I really do. I think it's okay to foster the idea of the unknown. Let's put it that way. It's okay to say that everything that you will be certain about should be proven by science. That makes sense. So everything that you want to be certain about should be proven by science. That's logical. But where I have an issue is where people, and this is maybe an openness trait kind of thing, because I think that people should be more open to new ideas, not vulnerable to new ideas in that they believe them without evidence, but they should be open to their concept and they should cultivate that concept of openness. And that, for me, is one of the things that would fall under spirituality. So let me give you an example that you may like or you may dislike. An example would be, does a God exist? So for me, I don't think a God exists in the traditional Christian sense of it. But then you have someone like Elon Musk, right? Who, I don't think of Elon Musk as a God. So let me go through the whole thing. You got someone like Elon Musk who says that there's a higher probability that we're living in a simulation, which then opens an interesting avenue of thought, because if we're living in a simulation, then there is literally, in that concept, there is literally a person who was programmed and designed and created and turned on by the push of a button our entire existence. And then conceptually, you could very easily say that that person is a God. Now, there's still not a God in the deist sense, in the Christian sense. Obviously, they'll be the equivalent of a hyperspatial alien scientist, right? But you can very easily say that that person is effectively a God to us. I mean, he's literally created our universe and can switch it off if he gets bored of the experiment. And, solipsistically, we would cease to we would cease to exist by him switching it off, kind of thing. So for me, that's something that you can't really think about if you don't cultivate that kind of openness of mind. Because you would say, well, there's no way to test it, so I'm not even going to bother thinking about it. And there's the scientists who really think that way. They think, well, there's no way to test it, so I'm not even going to waste my time thinking about it. My point is, well, I'm not saying waste 99% of your time thinking about it, but have that facet of your imagination at least open to the concept, even if it's 1%. So that's what I mean by things that may not be, things that are definitely not proven and may never be proven by science, but things that you should nonetheless cultivate an openness of mind for.
So you could say that, the amount of things that you could imagine are infinite.
Yeah.
And so he's plucked one thing.
I was giving an example.
But I'm just saying that he's plucked one thing out of the infinite number of things that one could imagine.
Right.
Right. So I get that being open to new things, new experiences, new concepts can have benefits. I guess my question would be, is it just are you talking about the benefits of the process in and of itself, or what's the how would you choose what to be to expend your energy being open to? Because if it's infinite number of things, why spend time imagining about that when you could imagine about other things? I'm not saying that you're dismissing it because there's no evidence. It's just that if there's an infinite number that you could imagine and all of them could be true and all of them could be false, then how are you discriminating between what you imagine and what you're not? Because you're just spending time imagining.
Right. So one thing is you don't have to dismiss, because I'm not asking anybody to believe. Right. So I'm just positing ideas, and then you can think about those ideas, and you can dismiss them, you can believe them, you can just consider them and move on. Another thing is it's largely a heuristic process. So just kind of like science itself is as well, like formal science is, because you go down certain avenues. There's obviously the scientific method, but you go down certain avenues and you see what works and what doesn't. And this is, in a sense, that kind of process as well. It's it's outside of the scientific method because we just said it's things that you can't easily test for. So it's heuristic. It's not about having to believe or not. It's not dogmatic. And the final thing is, similar to kind of Jordan Peterson's work, is does it give you utility? So if thinking about it gives you pleasure, interesting insights, if it gives you something else for you to imagine that could then lead to things that give you interesting insights, or if it could give you information about how to be in the world, which is something we talked about right at the beginning, then with that heuristic process, that's something that you would then say was worthwhile thinking about and imagining because it gave you either interest or it gave you some help about how to act in the world or whatever else it might be. So I would put those loose constraints on it, which would then, even just the banal one of do you find it interesting, right? Because you can find a pleasure in it even if there's not a kind of monetizable practical benefit. That actually shrinks it down a hell of a lot automatically from the infinite space down to what you kind of come across. So you can almost give a tongue-in-cheek example of watching flat Earth videos on YouTube. We don't watch those videos because we're really considering it, but we do watch them because we find it funny, because we find it interesting to laugh at it. So that's not something you end up believing in, but it is something you end up considering just for the purposes of the joke, right? And that's where we need to get Professor X to walk us through some of that. But I think that's my point. I think that's something that is lacking. Otherwise, you can end up getting too rational and too rigid and actually walling yourself off to either the fun or potentially overlooking something that could actually lead down the road to something useful.
Well, sometimes being rational in an irrational world can be fun in and of itself.
Being rational in an irrational world is irrational.
When I say irrational world, I guess what I mean there is when you see so much irrational things out there. You see people behaving so irrationally, right. I guess is how I should qualify that.
No, I agree with you. Being rational in an irrational world is irrational. Because if you are being benefited by being irrational, then actually the rational thing would be to pretend at least to be irrational, because those are the things that are going to benefit you. Kind of like the communist mantra of you pretend to pay us and we'll pretend to work. So when you're in that system, you kind of play the system.
We'll pretend to enjoy it.
Right, and if the system is grotesque, you end up having to either be grotesque or at least pretend to be grotesque to get by, or irrational or whatever else it might be. The spirituality, though, it's that process of finding things that you might either have help your mood, help your understanding of the world, help your behavior in the world, or at the very least might just open your horizons to new things, some of which will be bullshit and not work out, some of which will be interesting and lead somewhere else. Don't know where, but will lead to somewhere else.
You should seek to engage in things that bring you pleasure and give you interest, because then what's the point in living if you're not willing to allow yourself the privilege of those sorts of things? If we're on the planet for a brief speck of time,
that takes care of your problem with infinite as well, doesn't it?
Then why waste the little time that you've been granted or not granted that has happened that you happen to find yourself in? Then why waste that? I think that the interesting thing you said is that imagining things can then lead to insights, and I'm assuming that you're talking about making meaning out of things. What I find interesting about that is the idea of making meaning out of something that we can't describe, or that may not even be true. This is where Jordan Peterson talks about, well, what's truth? And some people, so his critics would say that he's changing the definitions of words to people that are taking a materialistic and, dare I say, rational approach to, or a logical approach to thinking and the way that he speaks about things, and they would say that he's changing the meanings of words to suit suit whatever he's thinking about or trying to describe, which I think is valid in some sense, and then in other sense, he's trying, like you say, be open to things you can't describe.
Because it's fair to say that human beings can't describe most things.
Yeah.
Originally and at the moment, and we are very much part way through that process of getting to the point where we can describe it.
So there's meaning to be made out of the fact that we can't describe things or all things. So that should teach people lessons in and of itself. I think there's lessons to be learned from that. Where I think it gets interesting is if you're trying to describe something that you can't describe, that has been imagined out of infinite possibilities, and you're trying to make meaning out of that or draw insights from that, then I think you get into an area where that you could pluck anyone off this planet and have them follow the same train of thought and the meaning that they may make out of whatever, and you be an endless possible number of things, and you can make your own meaning. And so then where's the point in that?
So subjectively, I would say that's valid. So to your point, if you took a single person out and they're all that existed, then I would say that the subjective point then kind of is valid because there is just them. But to that point, if you're saying that just as a thought experiment, then I would say the spirituality is good, side of it is good, but then you're still passing it ultimately through the filter of science, which I won't shy away from. So you can still pass it through that filter to see what is objectively true and isn't objectively true. So it doesn't have to be that you run away from science. It can run parallel to science, and when you choose to, you can take things from one area and pass it through that filter, and then kind of like what gets through that filter is then what gets accepted as the objective truth, and what doesn't is held in this kind of metaphysical, if you want to call it that, repository of knowledge. I don't see a problem with that as long as you keep the definitions and the distinctions of those two things clear. I only see a problem when you start having, people claiming that the metaphysics is objectively true and that the things that are objectively true are metaphysics, right? I only see a problem of those two things, which is kind of the extreme factual, the extreme atheist side and the extreme, religious, or the extreme kind of, fact denial left at the moment. Those are the only two sides that I've got a problem with. The guys in the middle who are happy for those things to run together as a stream, I don't have a problem with it at all. I think the two work fine together.
Yeah, I think making meaning then just has to be a personal thing, and then if it's about whether you think that it has a benefit to your life, and again, that's up to you to determine what benefit is, what it means.
That's good, isn't it? Though.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying
that's a good thing, isn't it? Like you take that personal responsibility about what is good for your life, about what you want to incorporate into your quote unquote spirituality. I see that as a positive thing. That's individual freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah.
If people want to go around thinking whatever they want to think because it makes them happy, if I'm trying to dumb it down into I'm not trying to be facetious, but if people want to go around thinking whatever they want to think, and then they get happy because of that, then whatever.
The utility function.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, the utility function. And
that's why I've got no problem with Deepak Chopra in the sense of
big chopper plus 2 strength.
In the sense of where I've got a problem with him is when he uses scientific words to explain, and he's changing the definitions of things. So that's where I have a problem. Which
is exactly what I said.
I actually like him. I think he's a likable guy. I actually enjoy listening to him because I think it's hilarious. But he's actually a genuine person. Because people call him a charlatan, and if you just want to go by the utility function and the pure scientific view, then yes, he's a charlatan. But he's not a snake oil salesman. I wouldn't say. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because.
But it's exactly what I said, which is that I only have a problem when people pretend the science is the spirituality or the spirituality is the science. I only have a problem when people try and kind of cross those two over and especially do it disingenuously. They keep those two parallel but separate, and I've got no problem. And if you can find utility in one or the other, then you go right ahead, or both. You go right ahead. And, insofar as he does that, that's fine. Where he doesn't do that, where he starts to blend the two together, whether intentionally or not, then that's where I'd have a problem with him as well. So,
did you watch that video I sent of the from the Czech Republic, the guy that stares at people?
No, what? Who?
I think his name's Bork, or
stares at people.
Yeah, I sent a video. Maybe I sent it to someone else, but there's this guy. It's a spiritual guy, right? And he got to a point in his life where okay, so there's some conspiracy stuff around this guy, which is kind of hilarious, but there's also, so he's extremely popular for considering what he does, and his demographic is very interesting too.
So tell us what he does.
He stares at people.
He stares at people.
Yeah, literally.
Like physically in the flesh.
So people pay to go to some sort of function, and they have people speak and talk about spirituality, and they talk about. I think there's Christian elements to that, and then he'll come out onto a dais and stare at people, and then people generally start crying, and then he'll do that for like an hour or so, and then he'll leave, and everyone will reflect on what that experience was like and how it's changed their lives, and they'll make meaning out of that, right? And he's got YouTube videos. Now he does staring through YouTube videos, and you can pay to Skype with him where he stares at your computer. And they say that his staring heals. So people have actually gone to him with illnesses, and they're being cured, and all this sort of stuff. So he's quite interesting because his history is, so he basically was doing some sort of degree, or he was in some sort of job, and he ended up hooking up with a guru type guy, and started hanging out with him a lot, and then became kind of like a disciple. Then this guy, they were at a beach together, and his master or his guru drowned, and then this guy,
totally an accident.
This guy then became the new guy, like the new guru.
So it was totally an accident.
And he basically took his audience,
right,
his guru's audience or whatever, and then basically started staring, and now he makes a lot of money from traveling around the world looking at people.
This doesn't sound legit.
It's real, and I'll put the
legit and real aren't the same thing.
Well, okay, so I don't think it's legit either. I think he's a snake oil salesman, but he's just got such.
I think he killed his guru.
Yeah. Well, that's what the woke people say.
That's what the police say. Hopefully.
The interesting point, however, is guess what his demographic is.
Women. Ah, respectful.
So it's just interesting. It's because I would say that maybe men would see being stared at by a bloke as like a challenge or a threat.
Is it?
Or like a dominance hierarchy, because if you're gonna let this guy stare you down for 15 minutes and let him change your life, then essentially you've been cucked. Who's that really tall guy? Tony Robinson. Yeah. His audience, I would say, is a pretty even split watching his videos. And I like him too. He's hilarious. I think he's just managed. I think he's made the most out of pop psychology, and he just scares the shit out of people when he gets in their face. I just think it's
funny for like a 6'9" extrovert to be surprised that he's had luck in the expressive arts. It's just like it's like ridiculous. But whatever.
But he's hilarious. But yeah. So his audience, there's a nice mix of men and women. But where this other guy, he's not quite conflating science with spirituality. He's just a snake oil salesman, I would say, that murdered his guru. And
it's a story born out of capitalism that we can all emulate.
I think I railroaded this podcast with something that's...
No, it's fine. We'll cut this out. Yeah. So So here's a close off. I feel like I've brought you back from the precipice of
Christian staring cults.
fear of the concept of spirituality.